All right, I'm here with Zac Kongonis. I said that right, right?
Nailed it.
Kongonis.
Absolutely nailed it.
Zac Kongonis. He is in Sydney, Australia. He
Melbourne.
would you say your focus is Olympic weightlifting as a sport? No?
Not really.
You
It's
tell me.
yeah, so first off, Melbourne, not Sydney. I grew up in Sydney, moved down, met my wife and ended up down in Melbourne. But I started off in powerlifting for the last like maybe first 6 or 7 years of my career, then just moved more into general S&C. A little bit of weightlifting, but mostly now just field sports and gen pop is kind of where I end up. And a good chunk of sprinting as well is the current kind of interest and passion.
Who do you coach?
What you
Field
mean?
sport athletes?
It's just a good mix. A couple of hockey players, a couple of soccer, AFL, few sprinters,
Okay, so
and then just gen
you don't
pop.
coach weightlifters.
I've got like one or two, but yeah, weightlifting's not really my passion. It's something that I
Okay.
enjoyed doing and liked training with Brandon, but it was never my niche.
Brandon trains weightlifters, right?
Yeah, Brandon's the weightlifting
Okay.
guy.
All right. So in my head, I thought you were both of you were not specifically for weightlifting, but a large chunk of your clientele was weightlifting. So I guess I had that wrong. But what about
Yeah.
powerlifters?
I don't really have many anymore. Like that used to be my bread and butter. I came up in powerlifting, competed when I was younger. 100% of my client base was them, but over the last 2 or 3 years, I pretty much did the full 180. It
Do
just
you
stopped
coach
interesting
teams?
me.
Do you do team coaching or just
Not a lot of
individuals?
teams at the moment. It's pretty much just individuals. I'm starting to move into trying to consult with some more teams, and that's the direction that I'm heading. But at the moment, it's just individuals looking to get faster, get stronger, and suck less.
Okay. All right. Now that kind of clears things up because yeah, in my head I thought you were mostly like uh focused on weightlifting as the sport, but all right. First, I want to talk to you about this. You call it the goated clean power test on Instagram. You said the measurements are peak velocity. You put the body weight, you put your body weight on the bar, and you perform it from a high hang. If you have to go to the top of the kneecap, you can perform a hang clean from top of the kneecap, and you're measuring peak velocity. But you put on your story, I think it was like 2 days ago, because I was going to critique it, but you made the same critique of the test that I was going to, which basically
Hmm.
is peak acceleration is probably a more fit metric to look at than peak velocity. Did I get that correct?
100%.
Okay. Okay, great. Because that's how I was going to kind of critique the test a little bit. Why don't you just elaborate on that point?
Yeah. So I mean, as anyone else on Instagram, you'd know, like sometimes you're just posting content to get people
Yeah,
around it. And I
I
think
get it. Yeah.
there's a good differentiation between looking at the velocity, which is super useful, but the real metric that you care about is the acceleration. A lot of the times, high peak velocities are great, especially if you can kind of standardize the range, which is kind of what I was hoping to do with that clean. Like if people are dropping it roughly the same space and they're producing roughly the same velocities and over time roughly greater velocities, you can kind of assume they've gotten more powerful. But without the acceleration piece, you're kind of just shooting in the dark because the range is the thing that's going to dictate
Yes.
a lot of the actual relevant metrics.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. So in the post, you said you're powerful if you can move the bar 2 meters per second. You're average if you're between 1.6, 1.9 meters per second, and you're not powerful if you're moving it at 1.5 meters per second or less. How
Yeah.
did you determine those are the speeds that you should aim for?
So a good chunk of it for the higher end was just anything that I say like in this realm, it's pretty much coming from either Randy Huntington or Ralph Oman. They're like the two people who I've looked at. And then Dr. Dale is another chunk down who he kind of learns from Rolf, and it's kind of this whole little ecosystem with those guys. But anything I say here is coming from them. So if I bastardize any of it, just I'm like way
Blame
lower
them.
on the totem
Blame
pole.
them.
Blame them. But the 2 meters a second is just saying anything at or above that mark, you're moving with relatively high velocities. Anything below that mark, you kind of pissing around in the kiddie pool. And from that point, Randy kind of said for the Olympic lifts, anything above 2 meters a second, that's when you start looking at it and measuring, and they're metrics that actually matter. And below that, I kind of just differentiated between some of my own client pool, some of the data that Brandon's picked up for those kind of lower, poor, and moderate metrics, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah. So if you're moving the bar at 2 meters per second, then you're using a load that you can use, and then you can extrapolate the data and look at other metrics as well. Correct? I
Yeah.
understand it.
Well, it's kind of like if you're moving at 2 meters a second, you're doing something right. You're either moving relatively elastically or you can just apply force for a long period of time. And that's where the acceleration part differentiates it because you can really start to artificially bump up those velocity numbers by just pulling on the bar for a shitload of time, which is what a
Yep.
lot of people end up doing. So at that point, if you start seeing like 2.4, 2.6, 2.8, it's most likely someone who has just extended the range of motion or pulled on it for ages, especially with a clean. And then you'll see like those bar crashes. And if you see like a really bar crashy clean, they've probably accelerated it over a massive period of time, put a bunch of speed on it, but it's not really an accurate depiction of how quickly they produce those impulses.
So how did I perform it? Was I good or was I clean? Was I
Well,
sloppy?
I mean, what was the device that you use? What's that one called?
OVR. OVR.
I reckon that thing cooked it. There's no way that was
That's
3.2
a
meters a second.
Dude, when I was trying to figure out which VBT device I was going to get, I was talking to Brandon about it and he said don't get the OVR. But I think he told me he like responded to my message late after I already purchased it. But I have a bunch of friends, not a bunch. I have like two other friends who use OVR and they say they really like it. But I just got it. I've
Hmm.
had it for about a week now and I really like it so far. Um, yeah, I don't know. I don't know how accurate it is because if I were to like pull out if I were to show all of my reps and the velocities, they were all between that like I think 3.26 meters per second was my best, but I think my worst was like 2.55 or something. I mean, so that's like I think
Hmm.
that's close enough, that
I
range.
mean, 1 meter a second different is huge between
Yeah.
2.55 and 3 point something. It's something that like every one of those machines, whether it's the cable systems, I forget they have separate names. You have accelerometers and then linear something something. The names escape me. They're all going to have different error margins and they're all going to have kind of different things they do poor and do well. I think the major thing to look at is just the percentage change between your reps. Like even if the numbers are inflated a bit, the percentage change will be accurate on the same
Yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
But I just think
'Cause
the accelerometers are just a bit more reliable and they give you more metrics because don't you have a switch to go between eccentric and concentric?
Does the OVR have that switch? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
You can like there's a setting where you can like select eccentric and it gives you eccentric values,
Yeah.
but it's
But you
always
don't
going to give
get
you the
both.
concentric. Yeah, it's always going to give you the concentric
Okay, I
values
thought it
too.
was you either get one or the other. So
No,
you
no.
can have both. Yeah, okay,
Hmm.
cool. That's a bit
Yeah,
better then.
I can probably just send you. I can send it to you after, and you can take a look because
Yeah.
you guys use like eNode.
Yeah. It's an accelerometer. It's a little like black brick, which knows where it is and where it's moving at all times. It's just super useful and it's really easy to set up.
There's no string to it.
No, it's an
See,
accelerometer unit.
I've used push bands. If you're familiar with push bands, it's the same thing. It's an accelerometer. I think that they
Hmm.
changed their name now, so if someone looks it up, they're probably not going to find it. But it's the same kind of thing, and I hated that one. I thought it would glitch out on me all the time.
Hmm.
So I thought the one with the string would work better, but I mean, who knows? As long as there's consistency within each device, it's probably fine. Um, okay, another question on the goated power clean test. Why body weight? Why not like 1.1 times your body weight or something?
It was mostly for the sake of the post. It's a much
Okay.
easier thing to say. People are going
Okay.
to see it, they're going to like it, they're going to try it. Because a lot of it, like with my audience, it's people moving into this sort of training. My audience kind of reflects where I was maybe 3 years ago. I left powerlifting. I started training more athletically. Put the fucking quotes there. And a lot of those people now, they see that content early on and they're kind of shifting over. And for a lot of them, like body weight's still too much. Because for a lot of people, and even for yours as well, like that really quick, sharp, snappy eccentric at body weight, for the vast majority of people moving into this sort of power training, they just can't facilitate it, which is why I put if it goes down to your knee, it's fine. Because they're just not going to be able to redirect the weight in time.
Yeah. Yeah, because when I was doing it, I was like, fuck, I should be using 130 kilos instead of 103 kilos. It was just so light for me. So I didn't know if there was like a I didn't know if you had a way to justify body weight, but yeah,
Well,
that makes
the
that makes sense.
justification would be the eccentric speed as well. Because if it goes too heavy, and you'll see this on your device, like if you went to the gym today and you did 130 and you contrasted the average eccentric velocity between body weight and 130, there'd be a huge drop. Like the eccentric speed you can handle on the way down would just, it'll blow out because you wouldn't be able to manage it and turn the weight around. Because it depends kind of what you're working on as well. Like you're trying to push your power development up by being more eccentrically capable and recycling that force. Or, as I said, are you just going to act on the bar longer and throw it up? Because if you're doing that and you're already strong, more weight is going to pump up those power volumes. Sorry, those power metrics. But
Yeah.
if you're kind of training to exert power in specific time frames, or your sport has constraints of how long you're able to push, then you're going to shift more towards the acceleration based model, and you're going to use those lighter loads and progress them in that fashion.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I'm gonna think about this a little bit more. Um,
What are you hung up on with it? Like what part of it's not
just
gelling?
like how much it really matters,
Hmm.
you
Depends on
know?
the sport.
Yeah, but I don't know. Do you play a sport? Or are you just like recreationally active? Because I just say I'm like recreationally active. I play basketball a lot. I don't really care about my basketball performance. I just want to dunk, but like I don't care
Hmm.
about it. I don't even really care about my like lifting performance or my sprint times. I just want to do it and like be athletic for as long as possible, you know?
Yeah. Like at this point, I think I can call myself a sprinter. Like I'm preparing for the next, like the track season starts here in like 3 or 4 weeks. So there's a couple of races already happening. And my goal is to push the best times I can on the track. So I guess I can call myself a sprinter.
Okay.
Um,
What are
but
you
like
what are you going to compete in the 100?
yeah, I'll probably do a couple of hundreds, couple of 60s. My 200 times are just hot ass, so hundreds and 60s.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Next thing I want to talk to you about is RPE because I'm in total agreement with you on RPE, especially for when you like you're saying you're using it to for power development. I have my own issues with RPE, but why are you not a fan of RPE when you are when you're training to develop and express more power?
Just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Like
I agree. I agree, but why?
so someone commented on the post that I put up and they said, "Oh, isn't it always meant to be RPE 10?" Well, the intent is meant to be 100% if you're trying to develop power. But I think that what people don't understand of RPE, at least in my mind, RPE is a tool to help you select better loads and guide training choices. That's all it is. So if you're doing strength work, hey, I don't want you to blow your spine out on this. Maybe call it a 9 instead of a 10. In more static strength based lifts, super useful. I love it. I use it all the time. In accessories, very similar thing. I'll use it all the time just for sake of ease. If I don't know how heavy their cable stack is, or I need to get some initial data of where they think they're performing. But for power, if everything's always a 10, how does that help you select loads? It doesn't. You just say, oh, I'll put in maximum effort to that 130 kilo power clean. You call it an RPE 10, but all the metrics that you're trying to train aren't improving. You just, if everything's a 10, nothing's a 10, and then nothing matters.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess we don't have to elaborate on that. I have a lot of issues with RPE just in general. I think,
What's your major gripe with it?
well, okay. A lot of people I don't think understand like where RPE comes from, and it came from the Borg scale for like
Yeah, it was like 5 to
cardiorespiratory fitness.
15.
Yeah, 6 to 20.
Yeah, whatever
And
it was.
yeah, and the number that someone gave an RPE to is supposed to correspond with their heart rate. So like
Yeah,
you're on a treadmill doing your VO2 max test, and the tester is asking you like what's the RPE, and you say a 9. So then you're supposed like I forget the exact equation, but it's like 9 times 8.88 plus 32, whatever the equation is. That's supposed to give you a heart rate, and it's supposed to correspond with the RPE. And it's like now people have tried to take that take RPE and apply it to lifting, and now they've made a scale of 1 through 10, but then they don't even use the scale of 1 through 10. They use the scale of 6 through 10. So why don't we just make the scale 1 through 5? But then people are still using a 10-point scale because they're going to call something an 8.5 out of 10, which if you're going to call it an 8.5 out of 10, why don't you just call it a 7 out of 10? You know what I mean? Or
You could
8.
very easily just say easy, medium, or hard. That
Yeah,
would
it's
work
it's
just as
just
well.
like I think it's a way for people to kind of like circle jerk themselves and act like prescribing loads and uh yeah, monitoring loads and training loads and prescription is a lot more difficult than it really is. It's just anybody can just do a set, make a mental note of how hard that was, and then decide if they want to go up or down. Like, yeah, that's my
Yeah.
biggest gripe with RPE. So
Well, it's
whenever I
it's
hear,
very rare that I'll apply it without a load range of some kind because you know what an effective load range for the difficulty you want, and you just chuck the RPE
yeah,
in there as saying don't cross this. Like I'll normally say RPE 9 cap between 180 and 190 kilos. Don't go past it. Oh, that was harder than a 9, but this is the range I want you in because I have a brain cell and I know these are the loads I need at this time.
yeah, I like when I program for people, like in my Haas concurrent training team, like I'll say top set of 5 at an RPE of 8 to 9 or whatever, and like they just have their own skill in their head, but it's not that precise, and I think some people try to act like it's that precise, but yeah, that's
Yeah,
my
any
issue.
RPE with a point in front of it's dumb. That's just stupid. You can't have
Yeah,
an 8.5 or an 8.76 because then you're just delineating the scale more and more that it loses its
exactly.
meaning.
Yeah, it just bastardizes it. All right, I want to talk to you about fast eccentrics. So probably like what's 2024, October 2024. Yeah, probably about 2 years ago, I was pretty big into fast eccentrics. Um, I just want to hear a justification of it. Why would you use a fast eccentric outs beyond the justification of like you should do a lot of things because getting good at a lot of things is good, right? I want to get beyond that kind of justification. What's the purpose that you see of a fast eccentric? Let's just say on a back squat, dropping down really fast and standing back up. What does that provide that just like I don't know, a clean doesn't provide because there's obviously a fast eccentric when you receive the bar on the front squat of a clean and you got to stand back up.
Super easy. You're training the elastic component of tissues. That's if I was to justify it in one sentence, you're training the elastic component of tissues.
Is
That's
it is it worth doing though if you're already cleaning?
100%. Well, like for the argument that you're receiving a clean, so you're saying that you're already receiving a clean, so you're developing eccentric capacity there. What's
Yeah.
the difference between that and like just doing a stick landing? You're
Are you
landing,
asking me?
yeah. Like that's kind of what I'd equate that argument to because you're catching a clean, you decelerate it, you stop, and then you turn it around.
Right. But you're bouncing out of the hole. You're trying to turn it around as fast as you can, just like you would with a back squat where you drop down fast. So yeah,
Yeah.
so my question is if you're already cleaning, if you're already snatching, if you're already doing even a jerk, fast eccentric on the dip, reverse that bar overhead, even though it's a shorter range of motion. Um, my question to you is,
Mhm.
do you really find value in doing like a fast eccentric back squat or front squat if you're already doing the Olympics?
Yeah, because the time
Okay.
frames are incredibly different. Like the metric you'd look at is time to peak velocity. And say something like if you're using the bounce out of a clean, if you compare that to the time frame of a jerk, they are worlds apart. Like, yeah, sure, you're bouncing out of a clean, but the bounce is slow. Like you're essentially bottoming out, relying on structure, joints, and tissues as opposed to the elastic components. Because those elastic components are only going to start winding and stretching at certain eccentric velocities. And that's where it comes in.
I'm with you,
Mhm.
but aren't you getting a better stimulus? Aren't you getting a better elastic stimulus, even though it's slower in a clean?
No.
You don't think so? Or what about
On the
just like
catch of a
plyometrics?
clean. Well, again, the time frames are incredibly different. Like you're looking at a contact time on a contact time on like say a drop jump. I've seen some of the sprinters in the squad that I train with, like they're ripping out like a 90 millisecond contact. Like that is ridiculously quick. That's in the margin of contacts for like upright sprinting.
Say that
So
again. Say that again. Say that
incredibly
again.
elastic. So the timeframes for a drop jump is about 90 milliseconds on some like
Okay.
high level sprinters who I train on a squad with, which
That's
is
that's the time
super
frame of
quick.
what? Time to peak velocity?
Yeah, or contact time on the ground.
That's
The
ground contact time. Okay.
Yep,
So when you have a greater time to peak velocity in a fast eccentric back squat, I just want to put
yep,
this together. You are, we'll say that's going to transfer better to a faster ground contact time in a drop jump.
yeah. Because what I've found that's interesting, and especially from a lot of Brandon's data, the specificity of the timeframes that you're training is way higher than I initially anticipated. Like the stimulus and the benefits you get from training like 150 millisecond TPV, super specific for those timeframes. Like you're not getting this broad, sweeping, positive benefit like you'd get from just general strength training. If you get your deadlift stronger, your squat's probably going to get a bit stronger as well. There's these broad, sweeping pieces. And I think one of Brandon's girls, she did a massive block of really quick TPV squats. One was like 50 kilos, one was 60 kilos, one was 70 kilos. The percentage change at the 60 kilo mark, I think it was like in the order of like a 20% percentage change at
That's the
60
percentage change
kilos.
in what? Time to peak velocity?
Yeah, like massively quicker. But the difference in time, that's where she did 90% of her volume. But the
And
time difference,
what type of sport is
mhm,
this? What sport does this athlete play?
weightlifting. So she's a
She's a
weightlifter.
weightlifter. Is it the girl he always
Yeah.
posts, Zoe?
No, no, not Zoe. It's Olivia is her name. She
Okay.
trains at the gym in Bandora. But yeah, like the difference in time at the 60 kilos where she did all her volume, massive percent change. At 50 and 70, still changed, but orders of magnitude less. So these adaptations are shockingly specific for the time frames that you're using. So that's kind of like for the sprinting. If you're doing TPVs at 300, 400, 500, 600, the transference is going to be incredibly low for a sport that requires TPVs at 80, 60, 90, if that makes sense.
Yeah, a lot of this is kind of the same type of stuff that Rolf Omen said when I talked to him. I don't know if you watched that. Um,
Yeah.
you can talk about this without as much fluff as he adds into it. That
He
was
just knows a lot more.
that was an incredibly frustrating conversation. Okay, so with the time to peak velocity, with that
Mm,
metric,
yes.
why does that matter for a weightlifter? How is that going to increase her total on the platform? Because that, I
So,
mean, your competition lifts are going to be, I mean, those are maximal loads. It's not
yeah.
going to, this time to peak velocity is not going to be very fast either.
So on a heavy clean, some of the TPVs are maybe like 600 milliseconds, but and this is something that's interesting. So when you're looking at the first pull and the second pull, there's kind of like a transition phase, and Brandon
Right.
started calling it transition phase as you cross the knee and you eccentrically load super quickly before you explode into that lift. It's
Yep.
that portion. Like the TPV of a clean is artificially blown out because you have to orient from floor to knee before you
Okay.
accelerate. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I'm with you there.
So it's
Um,
that point once you cross the knee, there's a part of eccentric loading as you rip in, orient, and push. It's at that point where this sort of training is useful. Because if you're better at loading and winding those eccentric structures, you're going to blast and hit that second pull quicker, putting more energy in for less time, which creates more time for you to get under, which is the whole point of weightlifting. I don't care how high the bar goes. If you can move the bar this much and that's enough for you to get under it in the shortest amount of time, the efficiency is going to be way greater. So that's where, for weightlifting specifically, that sort of training provides a huge benefit because you're getting better at exerting more force, more power in shorter time frames. Shorter time frames of the pull, more time to get under, more time to get under, bigger total.
do you think caring about time to peak velocity when you're lifting weights is, how do I put this, is just as valuable as caring about time to peak velocity in something like a jump or a plyo or a
Yeah.
sprint? It is.
Well, again, like it depends on the context. Like, say for
Yeah,
you,
yeah. I mean, oh, it always does. It always does, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Like these time frames are intrinsically linked to the demands of the sport you're playing. For someone who just wants to be generally athletic, you can clean a shitload with moving really slowly. A lot of people do it because they can rip the bar their entire body weight of height and then receive it and they're fine. But as you're getting into different sports, which have the constraints of time, this is what dials in your choices more and more. Because without that information of knowing the sport that you're playing, it kind of doesn't matter what you're fucking doing, really. But if you know that your sport has certain constraints and timeframes where you need to apply force, you better be training within those timeframes, plus or minus a little bit. And of course, you do the stuff below because you need to have a generally athletic base and you can't be useless at anything. You can't have deficiencies. You can't be weak. You can't be shit. No one's disagreeing with that. If you have a solid base, yeah, then the specificity and transfer comes more in. And transfer is a word that I had a lot of issues with like 2 or 3 years ago. Now I'm
Not
fine with it.
anymore though.
Now, because I know that if you train at a
I'm stuck in the
relatively
past
similar
then.
time frame, like it's like if you need to apply force in 150 milliseconds, you're doing a shitload of training around that TPV because then you're training the tissues and structures and every part of that system to move at those relative speeds. It's like in some of those weird meme clean variations where like you'll bounce it off your thighs and rip it. I think at the seminar Brandon did the other day, I pulled a clean with an acceleration of like 25.5 meters a second per second. Like this thing is moving obscenely quickly. That's quicker than I'd move in anything else in my entire life in a time to peak velocity of 90 milliseconds. So it could be argued that that's going to have way more carryover to say something like sprinting than a full clean off the floor.
So when you're getting someone, or either yourself or a client who is moving in that time frame, then do you add weight or do you just keep the weight the same?
It stays the same because weight is, I don't care. Weight's a dumb metric at that point because all I care about is your acceleration in those timeframes going up. It's a completely different lens.
But if you'd reduce weight, it'd be even faster.
Not necessarily, because it becomes exponentially harder to accelerate something lighter. It's why it's so impressive watching someone accelerate a discus that weighs, how much does a discus weigh? Like 4 or 5
I have no
kilos?
idea, dude.
I think a shot put's 7. Anyway, like they're accelerating these for what they are, tiny chunks of metal to Mach 4. Like they're merking them. And it becomes harder and harder to accelerate something lighter and lighter. It's why there's an inflection point with power. There's a certain load that's spot on. Below that, it's shit. Above that, it's shit. Because it's too hard to accelerate something too light. It's too hard to accelerate something too heavy. That's why it matters.
Yeah. All right, dude. We have like 7 seconds, 7 minutes
7 minutes.
before we get kicked off. Um, what else, dude? Before we wrap up, you're you and Brandon, you and Brandon are big into like looking at various metrics for power development. What else? What else you looking into? What else you interested in right now?
At the moment, I'm just pushing a bunch of conditioning stuff because for me, that's my whole like the last infinity stone in S&C. Once my conditioning knowledge kind of keeps going up, and I've done a couple of consultations with his name's Matt Fitzgerald, and if anyone wants to learn conditioning stuff, he's the best,
Is he
incredibly intelligent.
is he a Australian guy?
Now he's from Canada, I think. I think his business name is Optimum Performance Coaching.
Okay.
I think that's it. Matt
Matt
Fitzgerald, anyway.
Fitzgerald, right?
Yeah, he's super smart. And that's kind of like the thing that I'm doing alongside understanding these like improving TPVs and eccentric velocities. Because
Yeah.
once you have those two, I feel like I've got a base in strength. I did strength for 8 years. I know how to get people strong. It's super easy. And once you have the ability to, rudimentally rehab injuries, produce great conditioning improvements, understand power development, you can coach anyone as long as you understand the demands of the sport. So that's kind of where I'm heading for the next, 2 or 3 years.
Cool. You and Brandon gonna come to the States at all?
Look, I'd really like to. I'd really enjoy to go have a trip up there, but it's just, it's not a small flight. It's not a small
No.
flight at all, and it's gonna take a little bit. Look, to hold a seminar at the States, if it could be paid for by a bit of work, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, dude. I appreciate your time, man. I'm gonna close this out. Everybody, thanks for listening. I appreciate anyone who made it through this 30 minutes or whatever it is. and I'll see you guys later.
Thank you.
Um,